Karima Brown. It's Sunday morning and it's time for The Fix. South Africa's governing African National Congress kicked off its election campaign by releasing its manifesto to voters. We unpack how it's likely to land with their support base given the deep divisions within the party. Then we look at the crowded opposition landscape with new parties popping up all over the place. The latest is, of course, Mzwanele Manye, who apparently ditched former President Jacob Zuma's ANC faction. Our expert panel look at the opposition and what their prospects are in the 2019 election. And lastly, we take a look at the weekend newspapers to see what made headlines this week and why. The Fix starts now. This is The Fix, where every Sunday, without fear or favour, we question the big role players. We look ahead and tell you what matters and how it affects you and why you should care. With me, as usual, is my sparring partner, Sunday Times and Business Day columnist, Peter Bruce. Peter, good morning.
It's good morning. And
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to the viewers as well.
Absolutely.
It's nice to have them back. I've been amazed at how many people watch the show. I mean, I've got all sorts of compliments during the holiday.
That's fantastic news.
Great, yeah.
Yes.
I think people enjoy the banter and the guests and the quality of what you bring to it, particularly.
Well,
yeah.
and you,
and you've already started working. You were in Durban yesterday. I watched briefly on TV. You were in the studio. The ANC launched its manifesto. There were a lot of people in that stadium. Packed
to capacity. The stadium has the capacity to take 85,000 people. There wasn't a single seat open, and there was also an overflow area. And there was an incredible energy in the stadium itself. And of course, that was because the ANC had crisscrossed the province throughout the week to lay the basis for that rally.
There really was a lot of preparation in it. I mean, it was, in fact, the whole week was fascinating because it seemed to me that you know, the guy having the most fun out of Jacob Zuma and Ramaphosa wasn't, as I was reading on my Twitter feed, Jacob Zuma. It was Cyril.
Yes.
Zuma looked quite miserable on occasions. I mean, yesterday he got a very big, rousing reception, which is not surprising, I suppose. But it seems to me that, the JZ or the JZ camp is looking for a fight, and Cyril's not giving it to them.
No, he's not giving it to him because he's actually being quite tactical about the way in which he's dealing with the matter.
Well, how do you find somebody who just, sort of moves out the way and stands still?
Yeah, there's a bit of shadow boxing going on there. I think there's attempts to influence the process in terms of the list process, but they've been defeated on that. As you know, the NEC must still sit and vet that final list. And from the manifesto, which we will be discussing in a few minutes, you will see that it's going to be very difficult for people like Jacob Zuma to make it on the list. But there's a plan B, which we will discuss with our panel when we look at opposition parties.
Presumably both sides have their plan Bs, no?
No, absolutely. I mean, this is politics. It's 2019, the most important election, in my view, since the 1994 breakthrough, Peter.
And still, it's all about the ANC. I mean, everyone else is also around here.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing that people should actually keep in mind. The ANC commands 62% of the vote. The DA is a poor second, the EFF with 7%. And of course, things can change, as we saw in the 2016 election. But the ANC in quite a favorable position. In many ways, the organization is its own worst enemy because it's the internal divisions that makes it difficult. The president remains quite popular, actually.
Well, and typically more popular than the party, which is not the first time the ANC has found itself in that position.
Absolutely. And I think that the big thing here is that the ANC's push to insist that it is a South Africa who belongs to all, who live in it black and white. The push on racialism, for example, was very, very important. They actually sent the Western Cape list back to reflect the demographics of the province properly. So you can already see the signs of the strategies of which communities they are also going to be targeting.
What happens now? I mean, the sort of political start to the campaign is over. The other parties presumably will launch a manifesto soon. The EFF is February 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. The DA is still formulating policy, according to an interview that I was involved in with John Steenhuisen in early December. the ANC is off to a running start, or is it just simply that it's always this way? January the 8th is what it uses?
Well, I think it used the occasion very appropriately, and that's exactly where we are going to, of course, start.
Yeah.
On The Fix, we dig deeper and go under the skin of issues. This morning, we take a closer look at the ANC's election manifesto unveiled yesterday. And joining me to do this is our expert panel. We've got in studio Economist Lumkile Mondi, and then joining me from our Pretoria studios is Professor Somadoda Fikeni, and from London via Skype, Professor Adam Habib, Vice Chancellor at the University of Wits. Now, of course, all eyes were on the manifesto launch yesterday. Let's take a listen to Cyril Ramaphosa outlining the party's approach to the economy.
We want to mobilize more investments into our economy so that both government and business should increase their level of investment in our economy. We have a plan to ensure that investment can improve. We have a plan to raise 1.3 trillion rand in new investments over the next 5 years. Working with all social partners, we will intensify our efforts to restore investor confidence in our country. We will implement reforms in economic sectors that have greatest potential to grow and create jobs. We will take measures to lower the cost of doing business in South Africa and increase productivity and improve competitiveness.
That's, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa being unequivocal. Lumkile Mondi, thank you so very much for joining us in the studio. We're going to start with you. Your understanding of the weight of the economy as a factor in the ANC's manifesto?
It's huge. I remember President Ramaphosa, since being elected the previous December in 2017 at the ANC 54th conference, he's been on this investment drive, whether it's the reinvigoration of ESCOM, going towards the announcement of the 4 lions to try and mobilize, to hosting the investment conference last October here. So he's the man that really has worked harder to make South Africa an investable destination. And in that regard, he's mobilized also predominantly the private sector, domestically and internationally. Remember that we had Christine Lagarde in December, who came here. We had the World Bank president here as well, hosted by Professor Habib as well at Wits. So it's been very encouraging that here we've got a president that is very political, but at the same time is driven by economics. He understands the centrality of economics. If the ANC is going to get the honor and respect and the votes that it needs in May this year.
Absolutely. Let's bring in Professor Adam Habib, who joins us via Skype from London. Professor Habib, the focus on the economy is, of course, on the investment drive, because without investment, there's no growth, there's no jobs. But we also see in the manifesto, particularly on the South African Reserve Bank, that there is a concession that even though the Reserve Bank is independent, that the ANC would like it to move beyond just inflation targeting. It does talk about the developmental needs of the country. Do you think that Cyril Ramaphosa is balancing his left allies with, of course, the business community and trying to please both?
I think he's trying to. I'm not so sure he's doing it effectively. One of my big concerns, I think Lumkile is right. Investment is important. I think it's a precondition for growth. But on its own, it has the danger of increasing inequality. So it's not whether we need investment. It's not that we should be growing investment, but it's also how do we integrate that investment in a developmental agenda that expands employment, that brings down inequality, and that enables social justice. That's the trick. It's the biggest question of the global order. It's a particularly important question for South Africa. And I'll tell you this, because in South Africa there's two polarized views. One is just get growth going and everything will sort itself out. There's a second, which is white monopoly capital is dangerous, nationalize everything, and then we will get, it'll become the panacea for South Africa's problems. Both views are wrong because they're polarized extremes. What we need is a third way, if you like, that can craft an integration of those competing priorities. And that's what I think Cyril wants to do. I think that's what the president is directed to doing, but he isn't articulating it in the kind of integrative vision and bringing the stakeholders in the way they should be coming.
Actually, interesting, Peter. That is what he actually did do.
The first thing that I thought when I listened to the speech was how the third way that you're talking about begins to actually show its head for the first time, because he says at some stage, we will enable workers to own stakes in companies they work for and to share in the profits. He didn't talk about losses, but that's another thing entirely. But I mean, the general idea is there. We will build an economy in which all our people have a stake. And that's what you want, because if you can reshape, surely, the way we make wealth, instead of the top-down way it's created now, if more people are involved in the creation of wealth, we change everything. We change our society completely. We become a stakeholder economy.
Absolutely.
Which is, it's sort of almost sort of South African version of the Blairites' late 90s.
Absolutely. Professor Somadoda Fikeni, I was at the gala dinner on the Friday evening, or rather the Saturday evening, and the president actually used the word mixed economy in the pre-manifesto launch. So in a way, he is in fact pointing out that we are not going to go to the two extremes that Adam is talking about.
Certainly, I do think that right from the resolutions of the ANC in Nasrec, you could see a binary element in each one of the resolutions because each one had a rider. And therefore, he might be trying to conceptualize something that is trying to bring in the extremes, those who had called for the radical economic transformation without any conditions, but at the same time being mindful of the fact that you need to appeal to business, you need to appeal to investors, because the state of our economy and the nature of the challenges we face can no longer be solved by government alone.
Obviously, one of the big issues is the Fight Back campaign in the African National Congress. Now, we have seen the attempts to try and influence the list process. We know about the secret meeting that was held at the Maharani. I want to play us a short video that demonstrates how the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Ace Magashule, is actually still trying to see that they can tilt the balance of forces back to the ANC that he told people in Durban that they must wait for, that will return in 5 years. Let's just take a listen to that bite quickly. That, of course, Ace Magashule, part of the current top six, in the company of Carl Niehaus, the mayor of eThekwini, and, of course, the bishop that is going to be launching the new party, Lumkile. Ace Magashule's role in this entire list process has been put to the test, and in many ways this video alone can bring him up on charges of causing division in the organization.
Well, in fact, we know that that faction with ACE and former President Zuma is a very strong faction. Remember, Karima, that a number of black South Africans have had issues about our democracy, that the constitutionalism has not brought in the inequalities that Prof. Habib was talking about, that employment has not been created, and blacks have not fully presented the economy. Therefore, maybe taking the state out of the constitution may be the way. So the Zuma project was about unconstitutionalism, about creating a black business elite that's able to break the rules and empower itself. So, and they've done it, as we see with the Zondo Commission. So many people still believe that that mode, not the third way that Prof. Habib and Professor Fikeni are alluding to, but that faction is still very, very strong. And I think it's a faction that South Africans should be aware of, and we should really work very, very hard. Those that have not come forward to the Zondo Commission need to, because that is a dangerous option, going the route that we saw in the past 9 years under President Zuma.
Okay, Professor Habib, you've seen that video clip that we played of Ace Magashule. Now, Ace Magashule, of course, is the poster boy for state capture as it happened in the Free State. He is definitely still having to go to the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. How important is it going to be for Cyril Ramaphosa to deal decisively with people like Ace Magashule, who consistently advances a factional position of the organization despite the official line of unity?
So, Karima, I would say two things. I want to come back to the other part that Peter came out earlier, but let me answer your question directly. I think he's got to be more decisive. I understand the need for tactics. I understand that he has to be pragmatic, that he does have a very, very divided party. But you've got to be careful that you don't land up in simply appeasing. The real danger with establishing the tactical line is that you don't land up appeasing and therefore emboldening the faction that you want to actually neutralize. And I'm not always certain that Cyril got it. I thought in January last year he got it really well when they exited Zuma. I thought that they played land very, very badly. And I worry that they haven't got the line exactly yet. On the third way, again, Peter, you don't articulate the third way by simply putting the demands. We had, Franklin Becky did that for 10 years. The trick is, how are we going to be different in a very, very difficult world? And how are you going to politically craft it in this thing? And how do you pull the factions beyond the common vision? And I'm not so sure we've just got that, other than stating simple things like, we're going to get a shareholder capitalism, we're going to get board representation. I think we need to go beyond that. The third way lost its way under Blair, under Clinton. Look at what is happening in the UK and the US. We cannot afford that. We have to reimagine it in a much more social justice direction. And I'm not so sure that that vision is articulated as comprehensively as it should be.
Well, one of the reasons that it's not, Adam, is that if you were to articulate it as comprehensively as you should, it would scare people more than it already probably does. Because if you're going to put workers on boards, you also need to then say, you also need to look at the German model and say, well, you're going to put them into, not on boards, give them stakes in companies. You're going to have to put them on the boards and follow the German model. I mean, what you're trying to do, surely, is to create a consensus in South Africa about how we create wealth and how we distribute it. And the only way that you can do that is to get everybody thinking that basically the third way or the fourth way, whatever we want to call it, our way, our new way, is acceptable, and create a consensus that works for everybody. I just wanted to ask quickly, if you don't mind, Karima, a quick question to Somadoda Fikeni on the kinds of compromises that Cyril Ramaphosa had to make in his manifesto yesterday in various parts of the economy. On land, he talks about land is now suddenly being labelled a sustainable and radical land reform, where sustainable has come into the picture. When they talked about the Reserve Bank, because the Reserve Bank has come back into debate, the ANC believes, says the manifesto, the South African Reserve Bank must pursue a flexible monetary policy issue without sacrificing price stability. So that's another argument where they've just managed to contain it, and they are going to investigate the introduction of prescribed assets on financial institutions, they say, while considering the risk profiles of affected entities. You know, can you do all of this? Can you have it both ways without putting your credibility at risk?
The first one, yes. I do think that the first one is the political management of the resolutions at NASREC, precisely because those who espouse the radical economic transformation and try to attach it to the Zuma faction are looking, saying, is there any drift away from the positions that were presented? So here you are beginning to see a far more nuanced and subtle introduction, which was there in NASREC, but it's being articulated, wherein it's trying to make sure that the radical postures and the demands are included, but at the same time, a far more pragmatic approach comes in. Remember that on the Reserve Bank issue, long before you had all the other parties, even before the establishment of the EFF, the SACP, COSATU, had always had a gripe on how the Reserve Bank was structured. So internally, within the ANC, SACP, COSATU has been one of the most dependent alliances or supporters of President Cyril Ramaphosa. So he has to send a signal there without necessarily going all the way. So that is one element. And I would just also like to add that even during the cabinet changes, while Cyril seemed to have conceded in all other areas, in the economic cluster, that's where he seemed to have put his foot down.
Absolutely. Lumkile, I want to shift the focus now. Obviously, the economy remains the big issue, but the economy cannot be looked at in isolation. If you are going to be building the kind of economy that Cyril Ramaphosa is talking about, and I agree with Somadoda that there is a nuanced approach to the matter, and of course that's historically been the ANC's strength, is to manage that nuance. You've got to speak about education. The President put a lot of emphasis on education, talked about, for example, the focus on the fourth industrial revolution, and also spoke about the need to, of course, get these young people into the economy. What kind of changes in the manifesto is being presented, or do you think that it's kind of the same old rhetoric that is just being spun in a new way?
Well, Karima, firstly, you know, the internal environment that we're heading into going forward is very uncertain. I mean, we know what's happening in India with the Mondi. They're having an election also like us this year. We know what's happening in Brazil, but also globally. So really, there's lots of negativity around protectionism. At the same time, with South Africa having completely underinvested on education, I'm talking now at the bottom, and the input that goes to Professor Habib's school, for example, where, you know, it's gone through that process. And so we're very worried about how South Africa has dealt with education and how ready we are to really bring the youth into the labor market, because when we grew up, we always had a model of from birth or from cradle to grave, whereby we were being trained to get into the labor market. We changed that through the neoliberalism in the 80s. And that has not changed, because there's a disjuncture between what we produce in the education sector and what the demands of the labor market are. And that's, for me, the biggest worry. South Africa has not got that one right until we look at ways where the professors here could guide us in how we can develop really an alignment between the education sector and the labor market, and then we can integrate and absorb those unemployed youth into it.
Professor Habib, you are in the best position to talk to us about this. We've had this obsession in South Africa about our matric results. They've been politicized in many ways. But that's the end of the school pipeline before people enter tertiary institutions. The emphasis should rather, of course, be on foundational education. And are we paying enough attention? If you look at a place like Finland, for example, foundational foundational education teachers are regarded as the most important because that is where you actually lay the basis. Have we gotten that right, or are we still fixated on trying to fix things when the system of schooling has actually ended before people get into tertiary institutions?
I think we're making huge mistakes on education. I think that one of the big things that we've done up from since 1994 is massify education. I think that that's fantastic, but I think we've got a serious problem of quality. When you say that so many of our students in grade 4 and grade 5 are functionally illiterate or functionally innumerate, then we've got a problem in our society. It means our foundations are not working, and everything beyond that is not working. So we've got to fix that. And I think that we just got to get beyond the issue of enrolling numbers to start talking about quality. Are we effectively having the outcomes that are needed to that? And why aren't we having the kinds of outcomes? There's a lot of debate about the management of schools. There's a lot of debate about managing the unions and their role in this. I think we need a very, very serious conversation and a hard conversation on those issues. So foundation is one. The second is pivots. We do need a much greater investment outside the university sector in the technical and vocational sector, because that's going to drive the kind of issues that he's talking about in the fourth industrial revolution. And then the third, we need some investment in the top end of the sector, the production of masters and PhDs. Otherwise, we'll forever be borrowing from the rest of the world. And the trick is, how do you get the balance right? And I'm not so sure we've done that. At the moment, funding into higher education is being driven by where the protests are, where the loud voices are the loudest, and we're trying to resolve problems. And I think if we don't get a coherent, conceptual balance right, how do we structure the balance between foundation, pivots, the rest of the schooling system, and then ultimately the high end of the university system, that we are in serious trouble. I mean, we need a lot of, it's not that we need to do these things. It's how do you structure the appropriate balance between each of them, and how do you allow movement between them? That's the trick about Finland, or many of the successful societies around the world.
Absolutely. That is where we will have to leave this conversation. Thank you so much to Professor Adam Habib, speaking to us from London via Skype, also from our Pretoria studios, Professor Somadoda Fikeni, and of course Lumkile Mondi, our guest in the studio. After the break, we take a look at the crowded opposition landscape with new parties popping up all over the place.